what I never liked about this emphasis on being in the present and a rejection of thinking about the past is it seems to me they coexist, not just in the literal sense that physicists might mean, but there's no way to understand oneself or other people without knowing their past. In many ways, what we are is the sum of everything that has happened to us.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity. This is Synchronicity.
Welcome to episode 69 of Synchronicity. My guest this week is Randy Cohen. Randy wrote a column in the New York Times Magazine called The Ethicist, where people would send in ethical questions and dilemmas, and he would answer them through philosophical studies and, a way of delving into what is the right choice in these situations. He also, this is how I found out about him, has a wonderful podcast called Person, Place, Thing, where he asks a guest each week to name a thing or talk about something that's important to them, a person, a place, and a thing, which he points out in the description of the show is a really, really nice way to get people to talk about things that they really care about and therefore find interesting subjects. I've noticed from doing this show, if you ask someone point blank, about themselves out of nothing to just give their life story, and I've done that before, it doesn't really work that well. But if you ask them to talk about something they're passionate about or care about, you can get some really cool stuff. So I flipped the script with Randy on the first part of this episode, and we talk about basically what's interesting to him, and he has some really cool answers there. Before I get into the other part of the conversation here, I wanted to talk about two movies I saw this week that I highly recommend you check out. If you haven't already, I'm sure many of you have. Check out Lion, which I just watched. Oh man, that is a really, really great movie. I didn't know it was based on a true story until the end, and they show it, and that's pretty cool too. And I also saw Hidden Figures, another great movie. Highly recommend that. I got some other Oscar nominees on the docket, but I really do recommend those. I still think Arrival is my favorite movie from this year so far, but those are really good too. Okay, so I want to get back to this conversation with Randy. Going to keep this intro relatively short. A note for people who listen every week. How often do I say I'm going to keep it short and then do not keep it short at all? Every week? Okay, just checking. So this conversation with Randy was very cool because we disagree a lot. Like a lot. Like the first part of this conversation is real nice. Not that it doesn't, it's actually nice throughout. We're very cordial and very polite, and I think we're enjoying, a healthy debate about some of the things we're talking about, but we disagree a lot. If you've listened to previous episodes in the past few months, kind of my thinking about the Donald Trump situation. And it's not that I don't think it's a horrible situation. I do. Betsy DeVos was appointed Secretary of Education, who she thinks that we need guns in schools to protect against grizzly bear attacks. So it's not looking great. And I will give anyone who says this is not looking good, absolutely, I agree. I do think, though, it is an opportunity for us to kind of work out some other things, either outside the realm or paradigm of government and corporations, or really start privatizing, some systems here that are going to help people. That's what I'm interested in. But Randy, on the other hand, in this episode, you'll hear is like, no, you're totally wrong. There's verbatim, he says at one point, the no good will come of this, literally no good. I don't know. I mean, I know I don't agree with that, but I understand the sentiment, and I understand how a lot of people are looking at this as kind of like the preliminary rise to like a Nazi Germany or some fascist regime. And I'm not discounting that in any way, shape, or form. I just think that we're in a different time with, and this is a good and bad thing, with the aid of media or the harm of media, however you want to look at it. It's a little bit different than any other point in history. And I'm sure everyone probably thinks that, wherever they are in history at the present time, and thinking, oh yeah, we're not going to do that. We know better, but we'll see. So I like this episode because, from this, I'm not what you would call a confrontational person. I think if something, offends my sensibilities, I know how to kind of navigate around that without getting upset, because I do think it's important to hear other people's perspectives on things. But I very much enjoy when someone has a different perspective than me, and we can discuss it cordially and openly, and, really respect each other's opinions, even if we do disagree, because that's kind of the template for what we need to do going forward in the world with everything, right? So, okay. That's it for this week's book club. I'm wrong. I'm going to talk about it in the mid-roll. There's a mid-roll now in case you haven't gotten to the episode yet. So hear about it more. But the book club officially kicks off tomorrow, February 9th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. We're doing a live discussion. You can join that live discussion if you want by going to the Facebook Synchronicity group. All this stuff is on the website, guys. But if you can go there, you can sign up through that's the pin post. Sign that. We're doing a whole little live discussion thing. We're going to do those probably, I don't know, every 2 or 3 weeks as we read the book. The book we're reading is Don Miguel Ruiz's The Toltec Art of Life and Death. And really interesting so far. Wasn't my choice. I wanted to read Black Elk, but this one got outvoted. It outvoted that one, but I'm enjoying it so far, and I'm really interested to hear other people's take on that situation. Another thing, I'm recording this now. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm going on Michael Phillips' Patreon Google chat for his podcast, Third Eye Drops. I'm sure many of you know about Michael Phillip and Third Eye Drops, but go check it out. Go give it a listen. Great guy, super fun. Really has become one of my very good friends in a very short period of time. So go donate to him on Patreon. Get his juices flowing there. Don't know why I used that phrase. Take it back. Don't get his juices flowing. Don't know why I said that. But go to his Patreon, contribute a little bit, and then you can go in these Google chats and hang out with us. So if that's something you would want to do for some reason. So thank you to everyone who subscribes, rates, reviews, everything related to Synchronicity. Totally appreciate it. Gonna stop talking now. Without further ado, here is Randy Cohen. Thank you for coming on. Incredibly excited about this for several reasons. I was thinking there's a couple ways we can approach this. I'd actually like to do a quick person place thing with you. Kind of flip the script if that's okay. And
sure, yeah, anything you want to do.
And then we can kind of delve into some of the questions and learn a bit. I want to find out about you personally and kind of how your trajectory through the years and how you got to where you are.
I like that you indicated moving upward. It doesn't feel like that to me. Could you wiggle your arm a little and point your fingers down to the yawning grave?
To me, it looks like an upwards trajectory. So, so let's start with person, place, thing. Could you tell me a person who's important to you?
Sure. One of the things about person, place, thing is I try to remind the guests is it's not supposed to be these 3 items that sum them up or that somehow define them in an intimate way. It should. I like it if it's as light as possible, but it should just be the 3 items they happen to want to talk about that day. And if I'd ask them a week later, they'd pick 3 different ones. So with that wishy-washy caveat, I don't know. I think maybe... I would say Samuel Johnson, Dr. Johnson, the great 18th century moralist and man of letters. He was really the only person who wrote explicitly about ethics, who I quoted in the column and who I'd read for pleasure before the column. And continue to just, like, if I could travel back in time, that's who I'd like to hang out with. That he seemed to combine these 2 qualities, paradoxically, that I admire. One is that he had an incredibly bleak view of life, and yet was the most sociable guy you could imagine. He was interested in everything. He was interested in everyone. He touched life, high and low, happy and tragic, and yet continued to see life as what is it? Everywhere life is in such a state as there is much to be endured and little to be enjoyed. And they used to talk about hope as an insidious force because it gets you out of the present and encourages you to live in the future, generally an imaginary future, heaven, pie in the sky when we die. And Boswell pressed him about this and said, well, aren't people ever happy in the present? And Johnson said, never when not drunk. And yet, to us, this would describe a kind of depressive, and perhaps Johnson was. I mean, we might diagnose him as clinically depressed, but he was not solitary. He was essentially sociable, and maybe it was fleeing his depression. But he loved to be among other people. The other one? I consider a day lost in which I did not make a new acquaintance. It's pretty great.
And it's weird that someone who is saying something like that would have a bleak view of the world, because you would think if you're meeting new people, discovering new things, that would enrich your life and kind of give you... I also, before I forget, I don't want to gloss over this. What you said about hope is super incredibly interesting. I've heard and read in things in Buddhist scriptures too, that hope is actually looked at something that is not necessarily something to be focusing on, because it is kind of a future-oriented idea, and it prevents you from taking action or being in the present, which, depending on who you're talking to, that's kind of the thing. Ram Dass is be here now. That's the gateway. So I could you talk a little bit more about the hope aspect, though? Because that's something,
what I like about this is, I realize that it kind of resonates. I'm not a Buddhist, and I'm very unsophisticated about Buddhism, but I realize it resonates with the Buddhist emphasis on being yourself in your own body in the present. But I like that the Greeks had this idea too, that do you remember Pandora's box?
Yes, I was going to bring that up. I'm so happy you did. You put that on.
Okay. So for people who might not remember, when she goes into the box and all the evils of the world are released, only one thing remains in the box, and that's hope. And this is much debated among scholars. Like, well, why is hope there? The way I learned it as a kid growing up is it's meant to be this last bit of comfort offered to suffering humanity. Okay, we've now made your lives miserable, but we leave you this one surcease. But I like to think that hope is itself yet another evil, and that's why it was in the box. If what's in Pandora's box is evils, well, hope is in the box. And that maybe the evil was just, it didn't escape into the world, except, we're full of hope.
Right. And I mean, I thought about that specific thing so many times, whether it is another representation or permutation of evil, or whether it is that shiny thing at the bottom that's supposed to, make us feel better that all of this has been released onto the world. I don't know exactly where I stand on hope, because I think it can drive people, like, when you're talking about the present and the future and the past, most wise people will say live in the present. That's the only thing that actually exists. And then when you start delving into like quantum physics and modern physics, you see that time is kind of this concept that doesn't really hold up as much as we like to think it does in our experience of it. So I oscillate basically between hope, because if someone's in a very bleak situation and there's nothing around them that really is there to bring them out of a state that's negative, hope can be something that pulls them out. That said, it really can prevent you from dealing with what is right there at the time. So it's fascinating. I don't know that I have an answer on what it is. I mean, what's your inclination on it?
Well, I like that it's both.
Yeah.
And that... wait, I just lost the thread. What was I thinking? It's what I never liked about this emphasis on being in the present and a rejection of thinking about the past is it seems to me, I think as you were alluding to, they coexist, not just in the literal sense that physicists might mean, but there's no way to understand oneself or other people without knowing their past. Right. In many ways, what we are is the sum of everything that has happened to us. So it seems to me to deny that is to deny who we are. How can we possibly have any understanding if we don't embrace the past and examine the past?
It's really interesting. This is something where when you start getting into things like non-dual awareness and duality as opposed to non-dual, this is something that I think trips a lot of people up when talking about, some of the Hindu cosmology, the Vedic stuff, and Buddhism, because to say that everything is all one defies everything we experience in our waking life. We know there's good and bad. We know there's happy and sad. We know there's hot and cold. Our world is essentially a relative dualistic universe. That said, when you start chunking down, you realize the interconnectedness of all the things we are one. There is an actual basis for that. So it's another Ram Dass quote that I think is very applicable to this is, yes, you are God, you are the universe, you are everything, but don't forget your zip code. You still have to function in reality and use these relative kind of circumstances to maybe understand what is actually going on. And I think to dismiss the past and the future as things that don't exist, there's only just this moment, intellectually and conceptually, I think that makes a lot of sense, but that's not our experience. We haven't broken out of the chains of time at this point. So to dismiss it doesn't maybe have any practical benefit, or it has, it doesn't have the amount of practical benefit that we actually need in our day-to-day experiences. So I think that's important. I mean, to offer my totally unsolicited opinion on this, I do think we experience negative emotions, suffering, these things. It is kind of the sandpaper of our incarnation. These things can wake us up to greater things in our lives, and that may be their function. It doesn't mean everything is perfect, and don't worry about anything, but these experiences can kind of drive us towards deeper understandings and meanings. So I want to shift, because I have a feeling, Randy, that if left unchecked, we could probably talk for 5 hours. I'm very confident about that, but I want to be mindful of your time and keep this relatively within the confines of an hour-ish. Could we shift? Yes.
There were two things that occurred to me. One is that, yes, dwell in the present, but contribute to your IRA. I think that's worth doing. The other is I put in mind of the Alexander Pope remark, which I also learned, I think falsely, that it's hope springs eternal in the human breast. Like I learned that as a kid, and that was meant to be a good thing. But it's only the first line of a couplet. What Pope wrote was, hope springs eternal in the human breast. Man never is, but always to be blessed. That he was talking about that eerie future, that we're never happy in the present. It's the same as Dr. Johnson.
Right. And it's funny that is hope springs eternal is probably one of the most popular things to make people feel that everything is going to be okay.
Right. Pope meant it the opposite way. Hang on one second. There's something I'm going to hit escape for a second just to make something stop doing something.
Sure. No problem.
Okay. All right. I'm back.
Okay, cool.
Sorry.
Well, we'll take this as a segue into a place. What is a place that's important to you currently?
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Here's one. It's on my mind these days. So I like to cycle. I have a group of cycling friends, and we'll go do 50 or 60 miles on pretty much every Saturday morning. And and when you used to live in Manhattan, you know Manhattan, right?
I do,
okay.
Yeah.
So if you cross the George Washington Bridge and then go south just half a mile, you enter Palisades State Park. And then you ride north, and it's a 2-lane blacktop road. And this is not the proper name, but it's what everyone calls it. It's called River Road, and that would be my place. Mm-hmm. And it is amazing in that it's like being in the country 2 seconds from the biggest city in America. I mean, when you ride River Road, it's between those cliffs, the Palisades and the Hudson's, which is a very narrow strip. So there's cliffs to your left, the beautiful Hudson River to your right. Well, you live in the Hudson Valley, so you know it's just magnificent.
Yeah, it is.
And densely wooded. About halfway up it, it's about 7.5 miles, and about halfway up on the right, there's a bald eagle's nest that's been there for years. The same nesting pair has been there. The destruction of the economy of the Hudson Valley has made the river very clean. No more industrial waste because no more industry. And that means there's fish back in the river, and that means the eagles eat. But there was this nest of bald eagles that you routinely see. You see them all the time when you're riding there. It just seems uncanny. Very few cars, just a car or two now and then going down to the docks. And that place embodies, it reminds me that everything one enjoys can be found in New York City. And that 2 seconds over the bridge, you're in the country. And it's glorious, and it's beautiful and serene, and also very physically challenging. It's very hilly. It's very up and down, which I like. It feels great. And it also reminds me how much I like. This is a phrase I would have had contempt for when I was your age. It's regularly scheduled group activity. Everything in that, would have seemed awful to me. Like, I'm a hip guy. Even saying hip shows, no, I'm not. We're spontaneous. We don't know. We don't want to like regularly schedule things. A group activity, that's what could be square. But I really value this. There's maybe someone else, a friend, started this. It's just an email list of people who want to cycle. There may be 30 people on the list, maybe a dozen who show up regularly. Half a dozen on a typical day. They vary in ages from, say, I'm not the oldest one. There's one guy a few years older than me in his early 70s, down to people in their 30s who still condescend to ride with us. That how often do I very seldom get to spend time among at least a semi-diverse group of people, at least diverse by age. They're people who I mostly see only on the bike, but I'm reminded how much I look forward to seeing them. They have interesting things to say. I feel genuine affection for them. I like that they're the same people I've been riding with for 15 years now, and that continuity is very valuable. I like that. We don't talk about cycle racing. We don't talk about gear ratios. We actually talk, and it's so wonderful. And I think I associate that with River Road, so that would be my place.
I love it, and I'm just going to pluck two things out of there that I think are incredibly important at any point, which is being in nature, and especially living in the city and being able to just quickly get out and experience being in nature outside of the city is incredibly important. I mean, I know when I started keying into taking walks like 2 years ago, it's crazy that I'm 33. I really just started understanding that nature is a great place to be out. And like when I was in a negative mindset, even if I had meditated, even if everything was fine, if I just went out, walked around on a trail for an hour, it's incredible how it shifts your consciousness into a different place. And then the other thing that you mentioned, which is equally as important, is this community aspect. And this is something, what you said, regular scheduled group activities. Yeah. I mean, I'm so, I may be younger, but that has the same connotation that it probably had for you back then. Like, it is something that scheduling, please, I don't need to do that. I mean, I just literally a year ago realized the benefits of a schedule. That's how long it took me. I think it was like a perversion of an anti-authoritarian complex. Like, don't tell me what to do. I'm going to do things when it's right. But I'm realizing like, it's a way to get focused. It's a way to, create some consistency in your life that is actually going to be beneficial. But the community aspect of what you're talking about is so important. That to me, and we will get into the current political and global climate at some point.
It's deeply disheartening.
It is. It is. Well, we'll get into why I actually think it's a very good thing, which is, I know, very counterintuitive, but I do. I know. It's not, just to be clear, it's not a good thing in a lot of ways, but I do think that this is a necessary thing that had to happen. We'll get into that. But this aspect of community, I think, is one of our main buffers against all of this other stuff that's going on externally that, like, quite frankly, we don't have a tremendous amount of control over. Like, we don't really control our government at this point in any way. So to pretend that we're going to be able to influence that. But when you congregate socially, communally, on a local and smaller level, that's where some real genuine stuff can come out of that benefits society and people collectively and individually. So I love that your place encompasses two of those things, which, have had such an incredible impact in my life, just even over the past 5 years, especially. So I love that you get that. So let's go to the thing. What's a thing that's important?
The thing, like everyone, like my guests have the most difficulty coming up with the thing. And I usually like it to be a physical object that they can bring with the show and tell portion. Well, we're not too strict about it. And I might deviate from that just enough to go, the thing is my copy of just an ordinary Folger edition of Julius Caesar. And for a couple of reasons, and it echoes back to place that for the last, I think 18 years, it's my other regularly scheduled group activity. Some friends and I have a Shakespeare group. Cool. And we get together once a month and we read a play out loud. And I mentioned Julius Caesar for two reasons. One, because that's the next play we're reading. And the way we choose is we're going through them in chronological order, in the order in which they were written, insofar as that's knowable, which is pretty awesome. Knowable. Yeah. Except for the War of the Roses plays, which from Richard the Second through the Henrys through Richard VI. Those we're doing in the order of events depicted because you want to see who's cutting whose head off. I'm sorry, Richard. Yeah, right. Okay, never mind. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say Richard the Fourth. No, I'm not. I'm trying to say Richard the Sixth. The other thing about Julius Caesar is it kind of gets to the omnipresence of the utterly horrible political moment we find ourselves in. And it's impossible to talk about anything without talking about that. Yeah. That a week after the election, I went to this Shakespeare lecture that this fellow James Shapiro gave. He teaches at Columbia. I think he's the leading Shakespeare scholar in America. And what's great about him is he speaks to ordinary knuckleheads like me. I mean, I'm not a scholar. I just like this stuff. And he knows how to talk to an ordinary audience member. And he was meant to talk about with a colleague race and gender in casting of Shakespeare productions, how we think about that now and how it's been thought about for hundreds of years. Well, they couldn't get away from Trump. And what they ended up talking about for an hour was how Trump will affect what Shakespeare plays get produced. And it was just brilliant. Yeah. He goes, well, it's the end of plays that deal with integrating the outsider into our culture, like Romeo and Juliet, where there's two families, or Merchant of Venice, where here's the Jew as the other. How do we deal with that? And it's going to be all plays about tyranny. It's going to be Julius Caesar and Coriolanus, both because that's what the political climate will encourage, and because that's maybe a response to our moment. My battered copy of Julius Caesar.
Well, you've provided a tremendous segue into, just to confirm what you're saying. I've been doing this podcast for a couple of years. 2016 was the election. I would say over the past 2-3 months, it is impossible to do one of these without delving into Trump. It's just, it's omnipresent. Like you said, it's something that is culturally and societally affecting so much that to skirt around it or pretend like it's not existing just doesn't really sit with people, especially if we're trying to talk about things that are important. So let's talk about the current political climate. We're sitting here on, today's the 1st, right? Is today the 1st or the 2nd?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
It's the 1st. So it's the 1st of February. We've just been in the middle. He's signed so many executive orders that have been so crazy to so many people. I said to my friend who was a political operative, I said, listen, I knew it was going to be bad. I didn't think it was going to be this bad this quickly. I didn't think that this was actually he was going to rain down and put a Muslim ban in the first week. Like that's blowing my mind. So I want to share with you kind of my perspective of why I think this isn't as horrible as it seems. And at the same time, say very clearly, it's as horrible as it seems. So it's both things. I don't want to dismiss anything. And I also would be remiss, and I point this out every time I talk about this, you, like me, we're white guys. We're white males in the United States of America. Our day-to-day existence is fundamentally different than someone who's an ethnic minority, a woman, LGBTQ. There's so many things going on here that really can affect people who it doesn't necessarily affect us. That said, it's going to affect everything. So let me tell you why I think this was a necessary, needed thing to happen, and that I'm actually grateful in some ways that this happened. I describe this, the analogy that I've used is if you have cancer or someone you know has cancer and it's treatable, it's not terminal, there's something that can be done about it, you want to know. you have cancer. Because if you don't, you're not going to be able to take the necessary action to deal with what's going on. To me, and I think to a lot of other people, well before Trump, well before anything happened, it's clear there's something wrong with this country. I mean, I think it's arguable that when you go back to the inception of the country, slavery, Native Americans, we have some, depending on whether you believe in karma or not, there is some nastiness that we don't like to really directly deal with as a nation and as a society. And not to mention, how we continue to treat black people and minorities in this country. That's still going on. So I would refer to that as the cancer that is in the body of the United States. I voted for Hillary Clinton. I lived in Maryland. It didn't matter. 93% of people voted for her. It was completely irrelevant. My vote didn't count there. I wonder now if Hillary would have won and we wouldn't have been dealing with someone who's looking like he's trying to set up an authoritarian regime, what the state of the country would have been. All of these people who voted for Trump still would have been there. All of these institutional injustices, the corporatization of the United States, all these things still would have existed. My concern would have been, would we be able to see all these things as clearly as we do now if Trump hadn't been elected? So we're getting it out to the surface. I think, unfortunately, for a lot of people right now in this moment, we're still in the like, if, again, going back to the cancer analogy, if someone or yourself, you get diagnosed with cancer, you freak out. It's totally normal. No one's like, oh, no big deal. I have cancer. Not anything to worry about. You freak out. We're still in the freak out stages. We're still coming to terms that this is a horrible thing that's happened, but we're seeing all of this above the surface, or more of it than we have. I won't say all of it because who knows what's going on with Bannon, really. But we're seeing enough of it that we now have the problem clearly in front of our faces for those of us who believe this is a problem and needs to be dealt with, compassionately and wisely. So I think this provides a tremendous amount of opportunity for people who recognize we need to deal with this. And then we also have, because of the age of the internet, which I think is a neutral tool. It can be used for good. It can be used for bad. We have an amazing amount of power to kind of shift where this is going. And I think if we hadn't had this right in front of our faces, where our sensibilities are being attacked day in and day out, I don't know that we would have taken the action collectively or individually. So that's ultimately why I think this is a terribly scary, horrendous, horrific. We're trying to dial the clock back to God knows when, but I think this had to happen because I would be concerned if this stuff was below the surface simmering and we weren't dealing with it, that it would come to a point where we wouldn't be able to take positive action. So that's my ultimately very optimistic, hopefully not too pie in the sky because I'm clearly seeing what everyone else is. That's why I think this is a situation that maybe isn't as bleak or as horrible as it seems, while also qualifying that it is bleak and horrible. So I'd be very curious to hear kind of your assessment of what I just said and just what your general feelings. I mean, we'll get into it right after this, but you ran a column called The Ethicist, where you're dealing with ethical questions from the mundane to the non-mundane constantly. So I think you have a unique perspective of dealing with a lot of ethical issues and kind of seeing what's going on out there in the world right now. Oh, hello, dear listeners. I am letting you know about something I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, the Synchronicity Book Club. Every few months, we're picking a book, and by we, I mean people in the Synchronicity Facebook group. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go to syncpodcast.com, syncpodcast.com. There are links to everything I'm talking about. We're picking a book. We're discussing it live. We're having fun times. We're talking about other stuff. Get involved. It's fun. It's community. We're doing cool stuff. There's other stuff coming on, too. One last thing, and I'll mention it at the end of this episode, March 18th in Los Angeles. There's a MindPod Network live event. I will be there. Almost everyone who's part of MindPod Network will be there. Other cool people will be there. I will let you know more. If you're in Los Angeles and want to know more about this, or you're thinking of going to Los Angeles, shoot me an email, noah@syncpodcast.com, and we'll talk about it. Okie dokie, back to the show.
I think I disagree with everything you said, except that I did write a column called The Ethicist.
I love it.
It was entirely mundane. We were dealing with our social problems. We used to have this president named Barack Obama.
Yeah.
If you can remember back 2 weeks ago. Every year under his under his administration, the unemployment rate went down. The excesses of Wall Street were reined in. Incomes went up. He had a Justice Department that fought for voter rights. You don't think President Obama understands the way slavery has affected America? We knew all this, and we were moving the country in the right direction. Obama was way to the right of me. Donald Trump's administration is going to make everything worse. Yes. I think you underestimate how bad it's going to get, and that exacerbating our problems it's just worse. It doesn't make anything any better. They're going to roll back labor protections. They're going to take away health care for millions of people. Yep. I fail to see how this is. There are any benefits. This is all bad. Yeah. The arc of history not only bends slowly, it doesn't bend toward justice. Sometimes things can get better, sometimes things can get worse. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. Absolutely no good will come of this. Not good to anybody's insight into American history or insight into their neighbors. The fact that there are people who have a foolish analysis of it and are angry and want a right-wing tyrant to come in. Look, they lost the popular vote. Hillary Clinton won the vote by nearly 3 million. And the swing states that she lost, it's a few thousand in each of these states. And I'll mention all states where there was aggressive voter suppression where fewer people get to vote. So it's completely anti-democratic with the lowercase d. Where James Comey weighs in, where the head of the FBI is deliberately influencing the election, where Russian hacking is revealing potentially embarrassing stuff about one candidate, not another. It's a completely debased electoral process. Not to mention the utterly undemocratic electoral college system, that the majority of voters voted for Hillary Clinton. Yes. Who would have been, the charge from the right was, do you want 4 more years of Obama? I went, I certainly did. Yes. You mean improving the country? Hillary Clinton is, again, way to the right of me. She's too interventionist, but would have been, that's fine. That's fine. She's smart. She's competent. She's an adult. We have a dangerous loon running the country now. Without a doubt. And no good will come of that.
I don't disagree with anything you just said, except for the fact that here's our friend Hope, right? I do have some expectation, maybe not even hope, and I see this reflected already, that this is a collective wake-up opportunity for people. I was awake before, and all my friends were awake before. Believe me, we were awake. Trust me, I don't need this to wake me up. You don't, and I don't, and my friends and my peer group don't. But I can tell you, I know people who didn't know. There are gentler ways to wake people up. You give them a kiss on the forehead. So there's just like that. You don't have to punch them in the face. So there's a great quote from one of my favorite Tibetan teachers, Chogyam Trungpa, who said, "May you be bombarded with coconuts of wakefulness." And this is, I think, us being bombarded. This isn't like a nice, hey, tap you on the shoulder. This is you. People are throwing coconuts at our heads. No, I'm sorry, I don't buy any of this. I will give one anecdotal piece of evidence to maybe, and I'm not trying to convince you in any way. This is a Reichstag fire argument. Yes, another way to say it. Well, that's horrible. It is potentially, and I don't think we need to have the death of 6 million Jews and 10 million people to get to a good place. But what I will say, I don't know if something like the Women's March would have happened without someone like Trump getting inaugurated. And while that we may argue about the merits and how much actually that's going to change, I think a lot of people under the age of 30, people who really kind of don't even really know what the 60s was, they just kind of have it as kind of like a footnote in history. I think it's important that they see that there is a resistance to what's going on, and that is going to be, coalescing over the next 4 years or the next 2 years. Or not. And even if it does, again, this is it's really great when everybody rallies around after a big flood. Right. So, but
I hardly think you want to blow up the dam on the edge of town so you can have all the fun of everybody rallying around and bringing the community together.
Absolutely. And I hear
I find this argument utterly unpersuasive.
I like it.
It's just clutching at straws.
Well,
it's a horrible fire, but it'll bring us all together in the volunteer fire department.
Well, it's true, and that is essentially
I'd rather live without the fire.
Well, no, and I hear you on that. I think
there are other ways to organize people. There are other ways to bring people together. They can ride their bikes together.
Here's my question: what conditions created? What were the conditions that allowed this to happen? Because I agree with you. People
an utterly corrupted electoral process in any other society.
Right,
Hillary Clinton, she won. She had the majority.
No, I know
votes
that
by far. She won. If you believe in democracy,
I do, and I just to be very clear, I 100% agree with that. Gerrymandering, voter suppression, voter ID laws. That's what turned this election. Not to mention what you mentioned with Comey and all these extracurricular things that were going on that have never been a part of our process, getting down to the Russian potential influence.
Not potential influence, influence.
No, influence, Russian influence. I mean, potential knowing how deep it actually goes, where this was incepted, you know. Is he actually a Manchurian candidate, or is he just an idiot who's easily manipulated? I just think, I think there is some aspect of your point to this that undermines or dismisses that there is a cultural aspect of what's going on in this country that us in New York, on the liberal elites, you know, all these people on the coast, I think we're completely out of touch for how bad some parts of the country are in terms of, listen, and it's not necessarily because of any fiscal policy. Let's be clear. When automation and AI starts kicking in 5 to 10 years, all of those jobs that Donald Trump is bringing back, they're not coming back. They're going to be less jobs than ever before. And if we're thinking that we're going to pull fossil fuels out of the ground to buffer us against, that's not going to happen. I do think, at least for me, I can only talk about my direct experience. I was blown away that Donald Trump was in any way possible. I mean, the man still got 59, 60 million votes. People decided to vote for this person, regardless of voter suppression across the country.
People drink Pepsi, too. People make foolish choices all the time.
No, I know, but I think it is our responsibility as people who maybe think we know better or think we want to bend the arc of justice in the correct way. I think we have to be aware of the people who don't think like we do, who maybe have radical...
I don't actually. I think we have to address our social problems,
right?
Our economic problems, provide decent healthcare, provide a just society. But my understanding of politics is you ally yourself with people of fellow feeling. Right? Mm-hmm. That people who would identify problems the way you would identify problems, and then that's what political organizing is, and that's what Hillary did, and she got 3 million more votes. You don't have to. I think it's very, very difficult to persuade an adult with a fixed idea to change his or her mind, and that's not what politics is. But the implication of that is, well, yeah, you can ignore those people. You absolutely can. You can't ignore their circumstances, their social problems, their economic problems. But if someone has an idiotic idea, you can absolutely not waste 2 seconds of your time trying to persuade them. Organize for political change.
I agree that to try to change someone's mind is quite honestly usually a fruitless endeavor. It's not something that people come up with their beliefs and mindset. Most people don't even know why they believe what they believe in. It's the truth. Whether it's nature, nurture, whatever else, insights, most people don't know.
Chanel number 5. Too.
Yeah.
That person is so appealing. I didn't realize, because I like how she smells. Who knew?
So, I mean, I think I like that we disagree on this. I think fundamentally where it comes down is I don't think it's our goal to change people's minds. What I do know is through my life, I've been lucky enough to meet people, interact with people who have shared things, their direct experiences, their perspectives that of others that have given me some resources and tools to deal with my own issues. One of the reasons, and this is maybe a mistake and maybe a fault on my part, one of the reasons I think I'm not so traumatized by what's happening, and I'm on Twitter a lot, and I see a lot of what's going on.
And it's sad.
It's horrible. It's really horrible.
Well, you see a lot of what's going on.
Twitter. I mean, that's why I'm tuning in. I see as it's happening.
I'm not sure what the implications of that are, or if it's a model for the larger world or just the Twitter world.
Right, and I don't know either. And I guess we're going to see as time goes on. But one of the reasons I think I'm not, and again, it's privilege is a part of this, but one of the reasons I'm not totally despondent about this is I have enough problems in my personal life. Like, I am quick to anger. I'm impatient. I sometimes yell at my wife. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I have issues.
I'm afraid I have to hang up. Sorry.
So I am fundamentally looking for tools and resources that can get me to a place where I feel like I'm calm, peaceful, have clarity of thought, and then engage and organize and see what's going on. And I think part of the issue that's come in for me as I continue to calm my mind down, slowly but surely, I see just how interconnected all of us are. And I include people who have foolish viewpoints, who think that Muslims shouldn't be allowed in this country, who think that black people are inferior. I am never going to try to convince those people through a logical argument that they're wrong, because their beliefs are not based on logic. Reason and logic is going to bump off of them like anyone who just doesn't get it. But I do think there are ways to kind of open up a dialogue that maybe not with the specific purpose of changing their mind, but give some added perspective. It's like the famous saying that travel cures xenophobia, right? It's hard to be someone who thinks all these other people are so horrible when you actually go out into other cultures in the world.
Yeah, see, I don't agree with that either.
Really?
Travel is very narrowing. Sure, read the history of the great literature, 19th century English travelers. They took their own food with them. They were completely sheltered.
Well,
by
yeah,
their
that's
own
a good
ideas.
point.
Someone who's, travel just gave them more evidence of the inferiority of all the people who live in India.
Well, you know what it is? Oh, I love this.
If you're inclined to, if you're receptive to new ideas, you'll find them whether our man Dr. Johnson again, but rarely left London. Once he arrived there, and had the most expansive mind possible. So I don't know. Some people find travel fun, some people don't.
So
it's no panacea.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think there are factors or elements or things that are capable of changing people's minds and perspectives? Do those things?
Yes,
okay.
I do.
What would some of those?
2 ways.
Yeah.
2 points I wanted to make here. One is I absolutely do. Generally, it happens slowly. If I didn't believe in the power of ideas to influence other people, well, there'd be no reason to ever write anything or to have a conversation like this. So that ideas percolate through the culture, people are influenced. That's fantastic. That's what a culture is. That takes place very slowly, not during some election campaign. The other way in which I think people can be changed a bit more aggressively is I do believe in political organizing. And I think the Democratic Party has done a very, very bad job for the last 30 years. That the job of a political party is to say to people, here is a set of problems I think we have in common. Here's a vision of a good society we have in common. And you have to be able to persuade people of the second, and you have to have a keen analysis of the first. And the third step is to say, here are ways I think we can address these problems. That's what politics is. And the Democratic Party has done a very poor job of embracing working class Americans. Starting with Ronald Reagan, the Republican right so aggressively became a kind of cultural right that people who, if they were voting their economic interests, had been Democrats, and the entire South flipped, not because of an economic analysis, but because of cultural, I would say. Yeah. But so yes, in the long term, ideas change people. In the shorter term, savvy political organizing. A much better Democratic Party could have done a better job. But during the election itself, I don't think you can fault Hillary for too much. I think she ran a perfectly reasonable campaign. So in your estimation, what do you think? Is it just voter suppression? Is it just no, it's all those things. It's a combination of things. I mean, I wonder because, I'm 33. I know people who are younger than me who've been voting for 2-3 terms now. I think there's a general sense of disillusionment with the entire political landscape. Maybe a Bernie Sanders comes along and galvanizes people. Oh, I don't think much of Bernie Sanders. Yeah, it's interesting. You actually share quite a bit of
thinking with one of my good friends who's my exact age, who was very skeptical, very, very skeptical of Bernie Sanders, didn't find much in what he was saying was substantive, and really was just kind of, building on emotion and kind of disillusionment, and not dissimilar in some ways to what Trump was doing in terms of the populist.
That's not my argument against Bernie Sanders. It's that if you believe in political organizing, and I do, that it has to take place not just every 4 years when someone's running for the White House. It has to take place every day. You have to have, and this is something the Tea Party was very savvy about. Well, who's running for school board, and who's running for the state assembly, and where is this a group of candidates that will rise through the political process and become more insightful and more experienced. If Bernie Sanders were the person he purported to be, he would have established a socialist party in Vermont 30 years ago and started grooming those candidates. I think Bernie Sanders cares about Bernie Sanders. Ideologically, we'd probably vote the same way on most things, but he really let down the side by failing to do that.
It's funny. I mean, that's essentially what my friend was saying. He says that Bernie Sanders is doing this for himself. Yeah, I mean, he was saying that Bernie Sanders is for himself. People who have been around the political, been around him for 30 years know this, and this is what's going on. What I wonder, though, is, and I think what's weird is while we may disagree about the outlook and maybe the perspective and some of the conditions that led to this, I think we agree that the grassroots organizing, the community-based things that are going on, including your bike rides, right? Including going and cycling and being out in nature and having discussions with people. I think those are the things that kind of pull us out of this. And it may be that this
We don't agree about that. I don't think we are going to pull out of this. I think it's just
the death spiral.
I don't know. I'm not sure I'm ready to go quite that far, but I think it's just going to get worse and worse and worse for 4 years. Yeah, the country's going to be significantly worse, and why it's true. I'm old, I'm white, I'm male, and I'm as buffered from this as a person can be. I have an IRA and a fine union health plan. I have a union pension. There are two words you're not going to hear much in the future. So I'm as sheltered from this, the direct effects of this as a person can be, short of a nuclear war and the complete collapse of the climate, which you can look, are very real possibilities.
Of course, don't. I have a kid. I know.
Does it lead to the utter death of the planet? I can't promise you that. There's no the easy way out of death, but it's going to get worse and worse and worse for 4 years, and nothing good will come of this. And it will echo beyond that once he starts appointing the first of the right-wing crackpots to the Supreme Court. That guy's going to serve for 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, we can't know, but yeah, potentially.
Well,
he could die. He could die. You never know. I mean,
try to put a smile.
I'm not.
I don't wish him ill. I wish him a happy retirement in Florida, starting now.
Of course, no, and I don't mean he would die as a good thing. I'm just saying we don't know.
Kill him.
No, we're not. No, we're not going to kill him.
Absolutely not. I mean, tell that to the NSA.
And I'd like to just interject here. I love that you disagree with me on all of this stuff. This is how we sharpen the tools of our particular perspectives or beliefs. So I there's no contentiousness whatsoever.
We're courteous guys. Right? Yeah.
So I mean, I agree that the chances are 99% over the next 4 years, however long Trump's presidency is, things are going to get worse. I don't disagree with that. I'm kind of taking the longer term look of how do we look back on this in 20 years when my son is 20.
Through our tears.
I mean, I just feel like to think that we were moving towards some utopian, slowly but surely with Obama and some of the policies that were enacted, to think that we were slowly moving there and there wouldn't be, here's what I really think. This is the truth of it. I think the same thoughts, emotions, experiences that we experience individually through our days, through our years, through our months, through our experiences, our relationships, we now, partially because of technology, partially because of we can see this stuff so much quicker than we can, we're seeing these oscillations play out in our external reality. We are seeing this connection of what Carl Jung and one of his famous disciples, Marie-Louise Franz, talked about, the interplay of psyche and matter. I think the distance between us experiencing something in here individually and then seeing it played out on the world stage and the global stage, that gap is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And I think since we're in kind of a shadow, let's call it a shadow aspect of society and culture right now, I don't think anyone would deny that in any way. That's what we're seeing. And it feels oppressive and like there is no light at the end of the tunnel, or things will always, this is the beginning of a spiral down that lasts for however long. That said, until you shine the light on the shadow, which I think we're in the process of doing, and again, I don't think this had to happen. I don't think this is the only way we could have collectively come out better than this. I'm certainly not making that argument like the Reichstag fire had to happen and the Holocaust had to happen and Auschwitz had to happen for us to be like, that's not a good idea. I don't think that, but I am facing reality in the sense that it's going on now. This is the situation we're in. And I'm not ready to completely, on either side, I'm not staking out a position on either side. I'm leaning towards that this is an opportunity for generations to kind of wake up and see what's going on and maybe shift the collective evolution of this planet. That's where I'm leaning. But I don't know. I really don't. I think it's, I try not, I'm an optimist, obviously, as you can tell. I try not to be idealistic about this. I don't ever want to be like, things are great, you know, this is going to happen, it's just a little bump in the road. But I do have immense belief and confidence in the genuine compassion, empathy, and wisdom of a large enough segment of the population of this planet that we will be able to make something good of this. I don't think we don't elect a state and stay in it forever. That's just not how things work. I wish it worked like that because we'd all elect happiness and peace and we just stay there all the time, but it's not how it works. So I don't view this as a negative situation that just exists as a negative situation on an island, but rather something for us to work with to kind of figure out, like, how are we going to make this a better planet, maybe in 100 years. And you know what? This could be the
100 years. I don't know. I'm very concerned about how to get through dinner, but I admire the long view. I'm thinking, you know, maybe Chinese food.
Yeah, Chinese pretty good.
I don't want to plan too far ahead.
I know. And I mean, my worldview has necessarily zoomed out. I have a 9-month-old son. So it's not just me. Thanks.
Pretty great, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing.
Life-changing.
Amazing.
In a great way.
Incredible.
A lot of it's really boring, and yet the whole package is pretty terrific.
It's incredible.
I loved being a dad.
Oh, it's one of my, I didn't know how much I'd love it. And a lot of my friends are just now, you know, their wives are pregnant and I'm their go-to. I'm like, oh, you guys are fucked if I'm your go-to. But, you know, truthfully, it is an amazing thing. But I've zoomed out and try to think about the future of the planet while staying in the present and crafting solutions. I like that we disagree on this. I'm not saying I'm going to be happy to see how this plays out because I do agree with you. I think we're going through at least 4 very dark years. We are going to see the clock wound back in innumerable ways. And, you know, I'm not totally confident that he's going to get impeached like a lot of people think he is in the first term.
Then we get Mike Pence. Yay!
Right. Oh, someone who actually has beliefs and actually really they're shitty beliefs. And
right. They're all horrible. Right. He's not nuts right. And he's not stupid.
Right.
He's an adult. A horrible, disgusting adult.
Right.
But an adult. Yeah.
An adult who, that to me, someone with an agenda scares me almost as much. I mean, you know, truthfully, at this point, my main thing just in the political, I just want Bannon. This guy needs to get out of the inner circle because that's what scares me more than anything else. This guy, I mean, when you have a
dare to dream, my friend.
Oh, jeez. We'll God. Okay, so let's shift last.
Okay, what are we sort of regarding as because we're running a little short on time? What were we? 10, 15
minutes? On? 10 minutes?
Sure,
more?
No problem.
Perfect. Yeah,
that's fine.
I just wanted to touch on the ethicist a little bit, and then I have 3 rapid fire questions at the end that won't take a lot of time. Right. But I wanted to talk about the ethicist because, like I said, you wrote a column where people would write in about ethical issues that they would be dealing with, and I was doing a lot of research on it. You know, a first one to give people an example was there was a patient who was going to get some anesthesia, and he heard the name of the anesthesiologist, and it sounded like a black name to him, and he requested no black people, and the doctor wrote into you and said, hey, you know, like, what's going on? And you had a very very astute and what I think correct way of looking at it. This is not something to be considered. This is someone who's asking for help. While there are, you know, certain requests that should be granted, this isn't something. And then the update was they did actually replace the person. So I just am giving people a conception of what your column was about. My question to
Wait,
you
but to be clear, you're right. I did not think the anesthesiologist should have recused. I can't remember if it's a man or a woman. Right. The patient doesn't have the right to ask for that.
correct, right?
But
Which I
morally
agree.
or legally, as I understand it, although I'm not a lawyer, and
I think that's correct legally too. Yeah, there's no
the hospital really failed that.
Yeah, and they
But
did.
it's complicated because you do have an obligation to the patient. That's what made it fun. Yeah.
So I love that this is something you were being faced with these ethical questions, not as really a thought exercise. These are real life situations that people are dealing with. So my question to you is someone who's dealt with so many of these individual ethical questions, what to you is the biggest ethical question facing, let's say, the nation, the country, people right now who care about making the place where we live not horrible?
I'm not sure. I guess I don't. I ultimately don't see a distinction between ethics and politics. Politics is just ethics on a larger scale. But I see the essential problem as a political problem now. We have a horrible, horrible government, and how do you respond to its immediate predations, and how do you change it? How do you get these people out of power? But those seem like political questions, not ethical questions.
Well, they are ethical questions, though, because like you said, politics is, maybe in the past, I don't know, I wasn't alive, but maybe politics was more policy-based. It's identity now, right? These are cultural wars, or at least that's how it's presented to us. People at the top, maybe they're making decisions that actually have policy implications. But, identity politics has clearly infiltrated our political system where, Donald Trump is president based on some of the things he said that aren't policy-based so much.
We do have a kind of, I take a tiny, tiny bit of comfort from the permanent government, from the staffers at each of these agencies who, there are people in the Department of Housing who really know a lot about housing, even if their politics might be different from mine.
Like
These
Ben
are people
Carson.
Very thoughtful people. Ben Carson doesn't know anything about housing. Ben Carson, but there are people within the department who do, and some of them are to the right of me, and some, I doubt if they're to the left of me. But and that's true with things like when Trump says, well, we're going to pay for the wall with this 20% tariff. Well, that's a policy decision that economists who actually do know a thing or two about economics, unlike the administration, weigh in on right away. So that the motivation for that decision might have been just screwball xenophobia, but there are immediate policy implications, and they were admirably addressed.
So I love it. Okay. I want to get to the end of what we're talking about. I mean, hopefully maybe sometime in the future you can come back on and we can kind of touch base and see what's going on. I love these conversations. I think I actually enjoy conversations where people disagree with me more than the ones where they do.
There's nothing to say. Right? So long as there's no name calling.
We're just agreeing and shaking our heads. Yes.
Don't mock my appearance. I wish I had a different nose. What can I do? It's my nose.
Oh man. All right. So I'm gonna ask you 3 relatively quick questions that probably won't seem that important, and then one question at the end, and then we're done.
Will that one seem important?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe it will. Maybe it will. What's your favorite color?
I don't have one.
No absence of color, or just no preference whatsoever?
I'm very color. I don't. It was even hard doing person place thing because some days I go, oh well, the cover of the dictionary I use, Merriam-Webster. I like that color red, because I'm looking at it right this second, but I don't really have a favorite.
That's okay. I mean, this doesn't have to be your lifelong. Your current favorite color is okay.
I can't.
I'm saying it's red. You said red, so even if it's not,
fine.
You're on record. What's your favorite number?
Again, I don't really think that way.
Think of, okay, let me change the question.
There is a number. I do use 66 in, I refer to it from time to time. There's the famous root. There is, that's the year I graduated from high school. I don't know. It just looks pretty as a bit of graphics. So
I'm slowly pulling out. We're not holding to as your favorite.
Right. No, I understand. You're not, no tattooing will be involved later in the program.
Exactly.
On my shoulder in red.
Yeah. All right. Last one. And it doesn't have to be your favorite. What's an animal you enjoy?
That one's a little easier.
Right.
I'm very sympathetic to our fellow primates, and I don't know. for a number of years, I wrote for the Letterman show. And one of the most satisfying things about it was I got to work with some really talented monkeys. I just find monkeys endlessly appealing. And my most intimate relationship, this is a chimp named Zippy, because I believe they were all named Zippy for several years. It was like the Jason and, the Max of simian life for a while. We did this piece Monkey Cam where we put a camera on this chimp and allowed it to run free in the studio during the show. And it was such a pleasure to work with that monkey. It was great. It was great. You look at or do you know that movie Morgan? Look it up. It also made great use of monkey images. Yeah, monkeys, absolutely.
All right, I love it. That's right. I do a Vedic chant to Hanuman, who is a monkey god.
Yeah, the monkey god. Sure.
There you go. So interesting fact about Hanuman too. Barack Obama keeps 3 things in his pockets at all times, and one of them is a small Hanuman that his grandfather gave him. It was very cool. All right, last question. Probably a little more important than those. What's a practical tip that you could share with people listening that has helped you in your life? And this could be lofty, mundane, whatever. Just a practical tip that has helped you.
That lightweight down. They make those little jackets with that lightweight down. That's great. They're great. You can walk around. You don't have to have a heavy coat. It weighs nothing. You can put it under a coat. That's a pretty great thing. I like that. I don't know. I mean, is it too abstract to say we can go back to regularly scheduled group activities? It doesn't matter. You don't have to like Shakespeare. It doesn't have to be a Shakespeare group. If you like to play Scrabble, if people you play poker with, if you have people you like to go out and eat with once a week, engage with other people. That will improve your happiness.
I love it. Randy, thank you so much for doing this. I know we scheduled it quickly. We got set up with FaceTime.
No, I appreciate your walking me through all this modest technology for geezers. You're very sweet and patient about it.
Well, now you're set up. You're good to go. I'd love to do this again sometime.
Sure.
I had a blast. And I'll be tuning in to Person Place Thing. Thank you so much. So you see, it is possible to disagree with people and still be cordial, and we'll see what happens. Who knows if Randy or me is right, or it's somewhere in between is probably the likely answer. go check out Randy's podcast, Person, Place, Thing. Really great. Really, 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 really awesome. Go check out the episode with Sharon Salzberg if you need a place to start. Speaking of Sharon Salzberg, there's the Real Meditation Challenge is going on right now. Get involved. There's still time if this is February of 2017 for this year's. It's really awesome. It's one of the few things that consistently gets me to meditate. The accountability factor is great. Plus, Lily Cushman, who is a guest on this podcast, has made it tremendously awesome, more and more awesome every year. Really, really great stuff. That's it. Listen, here's the deal. I'm going to break it down to you people at the end who are actually listening to this. If you could take the time, go on iTunes. I know it's a nightmare. I know iTunes is a nightmare. You don't have to tell me. It's horrible. I don't know. We're being forced to use it. It's just what we have to do. But if you can go to iTunes, search for Synchronicity, this podcast, go there, rate it. You don't even have to put 5 stars. Put 1 star. I just want to see that people hear this and actually can take this action doing it. That would be tremendous. Because I check every now and then. And by every now and then, I mean obsessively. And I see no one's rating anymore. And I know you guys are listening to this. And I know you care because my numbers, they're going up. I know people are into it. So if you could do that, this is my desperate plea for help. Please rate and review Synchronicity. If you donate, you're super cool. You can do that. Got a mortgage now, so not above taking donations. Thank you as always for listening, and I will see you next week.